Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. My name is Scott Morgan, Roth Motor City Madmouth. And before I get to my crew here, just want to let you guys, folks out there know that the broadcast tonight will be on Major League Baseball's Mount Rushmore for position players. This will be some nice, healthy debate and comparisons about some of the greatest players that have ever played the game. Tonight's episode focuses on position players. We will do pitchers at a later date. With that said, let me go ahead and introduce my crew. Rick Curti, a.k.a. Mr. Opinion. Welcome back, Rick.
Hey, Scott. How are you guys doing?
Doing fine. Eric Katz, Mr. Concrete Dump. For those of you that don't know Concrete Dump, people in Montreal won't like it, but I don't care. That's Olympic Stadium, right, Eric? But anyways, welcome back.
Yes, good to be back.
And I know he's promoting a brand of a future show that I'm going to mention right now a little bit called Fire Up Wisconsin will debut on June 13th. Eric Katz, Candy Ebling, myself, and Mark Mancini will be a part of that show. And when I talk about the Fire Up series, I might as well talk about Greg Fuchs because he does Fire Up Florida. And Greg is the major reason we're doing this Mount Rushmore show. Welcome back, Greg.
Glad to be here. I feel a little left out. I'm the only one without a nickname here. So that's your homework assignment. Find me a nickname.
Well, that's okay. I'll just call you Mr. Internet.
No, no.
At least the guy's got a sense of humor anyway. So with that said, since this is a baseball show, I can't help it now. I'm going to lose it. Since we're going to talk about MLB's Mount Rushmore, and Greg is the author of this show, we'll just talk about Greg's list. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to go over everyone in the crew. They're going to divulge their list, and then we're going to have a little healthy debate, time permitting. All right, Greg. I know we talked about the fact that as of May 12th, 2022, 20,063 players have played MLB. Yeah, we know we're adding a few more. One of them will be actually making their debut tonight. Roger Clemens' son, Cody Clemens, for the Detroit Tigers. So might as well get Cody Clemens' reference out there. But at any rate, Greg, early era players, who you got? 1876 to 1939 criteria is.
Yeah, I mean, this idea occurred to me. I was watching ESPN, and hard to believe it, they were talking NBA, not baseball. And they were talking about the Mount Rushmore of the NBA. And they had Kareem, Kareem, Jordan, and LeBron. Fourth person was debatable. So I started thinking, who's the four for baseball? And I started thinking, man, you got 9 position players, and MLB's been around twice as long as the NBA. And the early era was much different than the modern era in terms of how they played the game, the equipment. So I just decided I'm going to do a modern era and an older era just for position players, and I'll do pitchers later on. So starting off with the older era, which was 1876 to 1940, obviously Babe Ruth. I think Babe Ruth is on everyone's list. Everyone knows who he is. I mean, his stats were just amazing. He's third on the all-time home run list. I think second on the RBI list, second on the on-base percentage list. And if that wasn't enough, as we all remember early in his career, primarily with the Red Sox, he was also a pitcher, and he won 94 games against only 46 losses with ERA at 2.28. So I think he not only qualifies for Mount Rushmore, but if you had a Mount Rushmore of just one person, I think Babe's the guy. All right. The other no-brainer for me was his teammate, Lou Gehrig. 340 lifetime hitter. He is 7th all-time on the RBI list, 493 homers, on base percentage of 447. And when he had the disease, he was 35 when he had his last full season. I'm not sure if the disease has started to take effect in that season or not, but he still had a good year. He hit 29 homers, 114 RBI. So if he had stayed healthy and played another 3 or 4 years, his lifetime stats would be really off the charts. But they're good enough as it is, even though he had a shortened career. The other no-brainer for me was Ty Cobb. All-time leader in batting average, 366. Just think about that, an average of 366. If somebody hit 366 today, they'd claim him, oh, he's the greatest player of all time. This guy averaged it for like 20 years. Second all-time on the all-time hits list. Didn't have a lot of power, but back in the day, home runs were not that common until Ruth came along in the mid-20s. But he still knocked in almost 2,000 runs. He's second all-time in runs scored. On-base percentage of 4.433. And unlike a lot of the sluggers on this list, he also contributed on the base pass. He had 897 stolen bases, and he is the all-time leader in outfield assists, something I did not know until I was doing the research. Now, where I think we're going to have a little controversy is on who's the fourth one. And I went back and forth on this multiple times. And if you ask me tomorrow, I might give you a different person. For right now, I went with Jimmy Fox, 325 average, 534 homers, 10th all-time on the RBI list, 428 on base percentage, and his 162-game average, he averaged 37 homers and 134 RBIs, almost as good as Ruth and Garrett. So that's why I put him on the list. There's some other guys I consider, but I have a feeling some of you guys are going to be talking about those guys, so I'll let you guys talk.
All right. Now I want you to go to your modern era players, 1940 and on.
Okay. We can jump there. To me, and I know there's going to be disagreement on this, but to me, this was pretty easy. I mean, Hank Aaron, to me, was an obvious one. And players these days, going back to 1940, didn't hit 366 like Cobb or 340 like Gary. So Hank Aaron hit 305, but he's second all-time in home runs. In my mind, he's number one because I don't count Barry Bonds. And let me say that right now. I did not include anybody who was tainted by steroids. So A-Rod and Barry Bonds, no way they even get considered for my list. He's also the all-time leader in RBIs, third all-time in hits, and had a 374 on base percentage. Just a phenomenal career. Willie Mays, who a lot of people think might have been the best all-around player of all time because he also played a Golden Glove center field with 12 Golden Gloves, stole a lot of bases. He also had 660 homers, 1,909 RBIs, seventh all-time on the runs scored list, almost 3,300 hits, 384 on base percentage. Just a tremendous career. The easiest guy for me in the modern era was Ted Williams. There's a lot of people who think he is the best hitter of all time. In the modern era, he averaged 344. Nobody else was close to that. And then you have to take into consideration he missed 3 years because of World War II, right in the middle of his prime. So he probably would have hit 35, 45 homers, knocked in 140 runs each of those years if he'd stay healthy. But despite missing those 3 years, he still had 521 home runs, 1,839. He drove in 1,839 runs. He had the fourth most walks of all time. In his lifetime, this is the most amazing stat I uncovered. His lifetime on base percentage was 482, the best in the history of the game. Almost half the time he came to the plate, he got on base, which is just mind-boggling for me. All right. Then I thought, when you talk about modern-day baseball, a lot of people just go, Williams, Mays, Aaron, boom, boom, boom. The guy who's right there with him is Stan Musial.
So, Greg, before you go any further, I think Williams was the last guy that hit 400, right?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yep.
Move on.
Stan Musial, he doesn't get mentioned with his other three, but he had a career average of 331. He ranks fourth on the all-time hits list. He had eighth all-time on RBIs, on base percentage of .417. And those are just amazing stats. And there's some other guys who I definitely consider, because there's obviously some great players out there in the last 70 or 80 years. But I just couldn't take Musial off my list, although I know some of you guys did.
Okay, there you have it. So, folks, you got Greg Fuchs' list. You go out there and have any debates, feel free to contact us at southfloridatribune@gmail.com. Before I go on to Rick Curti, who will be next, I'll let everybody know that this is 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. My name is Scott Morgan, Motor City Madmouth. You can find this broadcast on Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and wherever you get your podcast. You can also find it on the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. And of course, you can also find us on Twitter at Tribune South. So look for us here on the YouTube channel, as well as all the podcast providers that I did mention a moment ago. So with that said, we're going to go to Rick Curti. So, and Rick Curti and I did this exercise a long time ago. And Peter Ween, when I was working with the WEI network, this Mount Rushmore, and he was trying everything he could to go ahead and get around the 4-4. And I said, not this time. you really got to work hard to do. And and at that point, I only gave you a 4. Greg was easy and gave you 8 because he went with the modern and the early. So we're a little bit better off. We haven't counted the pitchers. You get a little bit more latitude here. All right, Rick, let's go to the early list.
Well, mine's very similar to Greg's. Of course, Babe Ruth. How can you leave Babe Ruth? He's probably the most famous, legendary athlete of all time. Everybody knows who Babe Ruth is. Even people think, oh, they named the candy bar after one. They didn't name a candy bar after him. That's a urban legend. But you got to have Babe Ruth. I mean, he changed baseball. When baseball got a black eye during the Black Sox scandal, he saved it. Ty Cobb, to me, is the greatest hitter of all time. He stole bases. He played in an era where they didn't hit a lot of home runs, and he did win a Triple Crown one year. He hit 9 home runs, but that still led the league. It was a dead ball era. He stole home 35 times. He hit 403 times. To me, the greatest hitter of all time is Ty Cobb. On my other list is Lou Gehrig. Great guy. I mean, it's so sad that he died so young. He's only 39 years old when he died from, of course, Lou Gehrig's disease or ALS. Still no cure for it. And I'm sure a couple of those years he probably had it, and his numbers were still outstanding. And what if he played till like in his early 40s or he didn't die? He'd probably be up there with Ruth. Who knows? But Gehrig definitely. And fourth on my list is Honus Wagner, the Flying Dutchman. To me, the greatest shortstop that ever lived. Won batting titles, stole bases, great defensive shortstop. He was like 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, where in that era or even today, you don't see shortstops that big unless you're Cal Ripken. So that's my list right there. And I'll go to my modern one right now. Sure. And number one for me, it's Jackie Robinson. He's a pioneer, great player, Hall of Famer, changed the game. So I'm gonna have Jackie Robinson up there on my list. Well, Ted Williams, of course, like Greg said.
Well, it doesn't hurt that I should add that Jackie Robinson's number 42 is universally retired by Major League Baseball. So I'm glad that somebody on this panel put Jackie in. All right, go ahead, Rick.
Okay. So I have Ted Williams, as Greg said, one of the greatest hitters of all time. He, the 3 years that he went to war, who knows, he'd probably be the all-time home run king. Who knows? I mean, it's just amazing. And when he came back, he was actually even better, which is even more scary. He won 2 Triple Crowns. Only him and Rogers Hornsby has done that. He won 6 batting titles. One of the greatest all-around players and hitters of all time is definitely Ted Williams. Of course, Hank Aaron. I mean, how can we forget about Hank Aaron, what he's done? I'm just amazed how no writer could give him 100% votes for the Hall of Fame. This guy led everything. Of course, to me, he's the all-time home run king. Runs batted in. He's up there in hits. Long, great career. He changed the game as well. When he broke Babe Ruth's record that people thought would never be broken, is Hank Aaron. And then last on my list it would be Willie Mays, of course, one of the greatest all-around baseball players that ever lived. Not only he hit home runs, he had over 600 home runs, but he was also one of the best fielding in his position. Who can forget that over-the-shoulder catch? Just an amazing, amazing player. And so that's who I have on my list on there.
Good list. All right, we move over to Eric Katz.
Okay, so like the other two gentlemen, I had to pick Ruth. I mean, no one ushered in the power era that we've seen than Babe Ruth. He was hitting more home runs than teams at the time. I mean, you just can't go wrong. You just can't go wrong with it. And also, I got to go Ty Cobb. I mean, the power era kind of came late in his career, but he still proved he could do it. And that stolen base record over 800 was well into the 80s up until Rickey Henderson broke it. So if that doesn't say anything about a guy who can not only hit the ball but also be just a complete menace on the base paths, how can you not go with that guy? The next guy is Honus Wagner. I mean, again, dead ball era, but still a complete menace on the base paths, considered one of the greatest shortstops of all time. And then lastly, I chose Tris Speaker. Tris Speaker was right behind Ty Cobb in terms of hits. So those two guys, those two were probably the better ball players of that era. As even today, as I look now, even today with those guys, is they are still near the top. I mean, obviously their hit record has been broken, but they are still at very near the top on what they're able to do. As I look now, Cobb is still number 2, and Tris Speaker is number 5. So if that doesn't mean anything, where you got guys from the dead ball era who are still in the top 5 in hits, and we've seen a lot of people in this league hit the ball extremely well at a high clip. But the fact that those two guys are still in the top 5 in hits really resonates just how good they were. And then my modern ballot. Okay, I got to go Pete Rose. I mean, say what you want about the guy, but nobody hit the ball better than he did. The guy could hit it anywhere and everywhere. Was he a home run threat? No, but because he batted toward near the top of the lineup. But hey, he was the one setting the table for the Big Red Machine. I mean, without those guys, you wouldn't have Johnny Bench or Tony Perez bashing it out of there from 70 to 79. And then my next one's Mickey Mantle. I know people are surprised at that, but the guy was a switch hitter, so he was like the very, very first of his kind. But considering what he put his body through, both on and off the field, and basically playing with a torn ACL his entire career, it makes you wonder like what he could have done. He still hit over 500 home runs in his career, but man, he still with how, and he wasn't even playing 100% a majority of the time. And the fact he won a Triple Crown and MVP in a lot of World Series, I mean, it just shows you just how great he really was, despite not being 100%. Heck, he might have probably been the home run king had he stayed healthy. My next one, Joe DiMaggio. I mean, no one was better for over in his career than Joe DiMaggio. 56 hits. No one's going to break it. I mean, Pete Rose had a good try at it by going 48, but nobody's come close ever since. I mean, it just can't be done. I mean, especially now, they don't keep the pitchers in long enough for them to really wear down. They just bring in a fresh arm. So it's definitely not going to happen now. And then my next one, Ted Williams, the last guy to hit 400. The fact that he lost 3 years of his career due to war, and he somehow got progressively better. That's unheard of nowadays. And and they didn't even have all those training facilities that they have now, where you can work on hitting and pitching or any position you can think of. They probably have training for it. This was back when you showed up to a gym or spring training after you worked during the offseason, because back then baseball players didn't make the money that they make now.
All right, Eric, that was a good list. All right, last but not least, I have my list. Babe Ruth, how do you leave him off? You can't. 714 home runs, number that everybody remembers, household number. What else is there to say? And let alone, like what Greg said, the win, what he did as a pitcher certainly helped enhance his legacy. Lou Gehrig, I don't care what anybody says. When you go to work every single day, let alone the fact that you have a fatal disease, anybody that goes to work every single day, blue collar, being from the Detroit area, not that you can tell by my name, the Motor City Madmouth, you show up to work every day, you're going to get on my list no matter what, and you'll find out as I get to the next list as well. So, yeah, Lou Gehrig, unfortunately, has a disease named after him, as Rick alluded to. Okay, too bad we haven't found a cure for it. I know we're working on cancer, we work on everything else, but we haven't mastered ALS. What a darn shame. Although I think they're going to be having a promotion in the next month or so to try to raise money for it, but it doesn't matter. We've lost too many people over a long period of time. So far, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, yeah, I'm a Detroiter, but that you don't have to be a Detroiter to put Ty Cobb on the list. We all know he was a fierce competitor on the bases, and we all know he was a tremendous hitter, 400 hitter and whatnot. So, and of course, I believe he's the first one inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. It was part of the original class as well. And the fourth one of my early era, I'm going to go Rogers Hornsby. Hit 358, 301 home runs, 2,930 hits. What can I say? Rogers, to me, back then was a heck of a player, and I'm putting him on my list. Modern day era, probably a little more. I might be a little bit more different than the rest of you guys with this list, but that's what's great about these lists. First of all, I'm not leaving Hank Aaron off because, like Greg Fuchs said, I do recognize him as an all-time home run king. No Barry Bonds. I'm not drinking the Barry Bonds Kool-Aid like all these steroid people. I wouldn't put A-Rod on there either. But Hank Aaron is the all-time home run king in my book. 300. Don't forget his 305 average, 755 home runs, 3,771 hits, an icon all over baseball, but particularly in Atlanta and Milwaukee. And he did play for the Milwaukee Braves as well. When I talk about showing up to work, I don't think anybody did it better than Cal Ripken Jr. 2,632 consecutive games, 432 home runs, 3,184 hits, 276 average. But the biggest thing about Cal Ripken Jr. is he saved the game of baseball. 1994 strike. And I'll tell you what, had that consecutive game streak been compromised and they counted the replacement players, baseball would have never survived. So I guess I put together a premium of showing up to work, and Cal Ripken Jr. deserves to be on my list, let alone the fact that 98.53% Hall of Fame first ballot. A lot of people probably felt the same way as well. Well, back to Detroit, folks. Miguel Cabrera, 505 home runs, 3,029 home runs, still counting his lifetime 310 average. I believe the last guy to win the Triple Crown was Miguel Cabrera. So, you want to, and his career still continues. I know his numbers would be a little bit more if he wasn't decimated by injuries the last few years, but he made the key milestones, 3,500. So 3,000 hits, 500 home runs. And of course, you know what? I'm with you, Eric. Pete Rose, 4,256 hits, lifetime 303 average. Yes, 160 home run doesn't cut it in most cases, but he wasn't a home run hitter. And all he did was win titles. I believe he won one with Philadelphia as well. So he won titles in two places. So
and he also nearly got the Expos to the playoffs.
Yeah, well, there you go. The concrete dump people as well. So, yeah, you know what? I don't what Pete Rose did in terms of gambling has nothing to do with what he did on the field as a player. And it's unfortunate Ray Fosse's career was compromised because of a collision at the plate in the All-Star game. But Pete Rose, say what you want about him gambling wise, but I still think, and you know what? There'll always be that debate whether or not he gets in the Hall of Fame. I do think he believes it, but I understand that the bylaws indicate if you bet on the game of baseball, you're not getting it. And he did the lifetime ban, and he didn't help matters any when he kept selling books over Cooperstown and tried to show up the Hall of Fame voting and never showed any remorse. But again, let me keep things objective here, okay? Pete Rose, by virtue of his baseball stats, I think belongs in the Hall of Fame, and that's what we're basing our criteria. Now, what I've noticed here are that our modern era lists definitely differ. So the only players that we all agree on is Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb. Greg, Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb. Rick, Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb. Myself, Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, and of course Eric. Lou Gehrig doesn't appear on it. I don't think he appears in your list, but justifiably so. So here's what we're going to do, Greg. Any questions or comments about what all of us have talked about?
A few things. A couple times the comment was made, well, if it wasn't for injuries or something like that. One of my favorite quotes when it comes to sports, the best ability is availability. And that's why Cal's on your list. As much as I love Cal, I wouldn't put him on the list, but that's why he's on that list. It's one of the reasons Gehrig is on that list. So some of these guys who miss games, that's part of playing the sports. If you weren't on the field, that has to be held against you to a certain degree. And I just, for the modern day era, I struggled because I'm going, maybe DiMaggio should be on there. Maybe Albert Pujols. If I was to put anyone recent on the thing, I would take Pujols over Cabrera. But Stan Musial's career, a 331 average, 4th all-time on hits, 8th all-time RBIs, I just couldn't leave him off the list.
Well, that's why we have a list, right, Greg? Let's face it, I'm glad that Eric pointed out Joe DiMaggio. How do you not ignore 56 consecutive games since nobody's even touched it? But
and he married Marilyn Monroe. He's going to be on someone's list
there either. Yeah, but again, that's what makes this list so neat because we all have different reasons for putting people on. So, Rick, want to give me some of your thoughts about the list in general and what we've all talked about?
Well, I like it. It's very consistent, especially the older era. I mean, you got to have Ruth. You got to have Cobb. Cobb was like the king of the dead ball era, and then Ruth was the king of the live ball era, and hit more home runs than teams combined. To me, my dad always told me Lou Gehrig is a better baseball player than Babe Ruth, and I agree. And it's so sad that he died at the age of 39 from a horrific disease, and he probably played a couple of years when he had ALS. So that's mind-boggling to me, and all those games in a row. And to me, Honus Wagner, him and Cobb in the dead ball era were like number one or number two, and who's the greatest player of all time. They actually met in the World Series, and the Pirates beat the Tigers. And Honus Wagner had a better series than Cobb. So people say Honus Wagner's better than Cobb. So it was a debate going on and on during that era. Stole bases, great fielding shortstop, won batting titles. I think he won 8 batting titles, and that was the National League record. Cobb won 12, which is the Major League record, and he won 9 in a row. So, I mean, those two guys were like two of the greatest hitters of that era.
And as far as any other thoughts about what we did compared to anybody else, everybody gets a chance to summarize everybody, and then we'll call it a night in about 10 or 15 minutes. Just want to make sure everybody, now that the list is out there, any other things you want to add to it, Rick?
I love having Musial on there. I wanted to have him on there. To me, he doesn't get the recognition that most of these players get, like a Willie Mays, a Hank Aaron, or Ted Williams. He was phenomenal. Just a great guy. Stan the Man Musial, of course. Pete Rose. There's no wrong answers on this list. They're all great people on here, all great. It's just when you narrow down to 4, you're gonna leave somebody off. And that's just how it is. And I wish I could have Joe DiMaggio on here and Rogers Hornsby, but this is my list. It's a great list. I like my list. I like everyone else's list. There's absolutely no argument for me from anyone.
All right, Eric, go ahead.
I mean, you can't go wrong with Stan Musial. I had a hard time leaving him off just because of who he is and what he did during his career. I mean, I'd probably say, he was Pete Rose before Pete Rose. Actually, probably the much cleaner version of Pete Rose if you think about it. But I had a hard time with that one. But for me though, Mantle, 3 MVPs while playing with a torn ACL. I mean, no one could do that's unheard of. They didn't even have the surgery back then. I mean, many suspect that now in modern day medical terms. But the fact of the matter is he played with a bum knee for all of his career, and he was still the fastest man to first. It just shows you just how great he was, and just the fact that he was willing to, including later in his career when he couldn't play every day, and he could have left the game with a 300 average, but he didn't want to do that. He wanted to continue to play, and the guy did it well into his career, including when he and Danny McClain were having a conversation where he served him up a meatball and he popped it over into the right field bleachers at Old Tiger Stadium. But obviously, Stan Musial, I had a real hard time keeping him off the list just because of how good he was. But to me, Tris Speaker, though, just, the fact that he's still a top 5 all-time hits leader in 2022, I mean, it just speaks volumes just of how great he was. And he's one of the all-time forgotten greats, in my opinion.
Doesn't he hold the record for most doubles in the career?
He does. And he also won a World Series as a manager.
Yeah. He was a great player.
All right, let me go over a few other things. Yeah, you know what? For me, I think my list was kind of where I wanted it to be because I did want a lot of some of the newer play. I wanted to see the Cabreras get acknowledged. I wanted to see Rose, despite the controversy, and Ripken. But, there's 4 other guys I could throw out there, even though they didn't make the list. But nobody would have gone wrong with Roberto Clemente. Okay. No. But I do want to say this before I go further with Clemente. Rick, I am really delighted that you put Jackie Robinson on this list. And I'll tell you why. Because what you did is you put together a guy here who obviously had to battle through the race situation. And you talk about a pioneer. I think a pioneer deserves to be on it. When you included Robinson, I was very delighted to hear that. So
thank you.
You're no problem. Hey, listen, you know what? Baseball is about history. And I'm looking forward to going to the Hall of Fame in August with my wife later on, so she gets a crack at Cooperstown, and it's just going to be cool. But the fact that you brought Robinson on, more power to you. Okay, now
thank you.
On to some other things. Roberto Clemente could have made a good case to get on there. Okay. Lou Brock, one of the quickest guys out there. You want to acknowledge speed? Ricky Henderson. What about Ernie Banks? These are guys, again, you talk about the what ifs. But again, the list is what it is, 4-4. And if I want to go 4 all time, this would be an impossible task, which is why I'm glad that Greg Fuchs went ahead and broke everything down to at least give you a 4 early and 4 later because the criteria has changed. And I'm really looking forward to doing the show when we bring on pitchers because that'll be, if you thought this one was interesting, is what it is. So
every era always has great players, whether that be like the dead ball era to now. There will always be great players where you feel like they could be on the list. I mean, I had a hard time sorting through that just because, a lot of the times, there truly are great players and it's hard to just name 5. I mean, there's a reason the Hall of Fame has more than 5 players in the Hall of Fame just because of how truly great those players are.
Well, what people have to understand, the criteria to get in the Hall of Fame is you need 75% to get in. And not 74.8, but 75. I believe it's one of the toughest Hall of Fames to get into. So when you earn your way in here, I don't care about Veterans Committee and all that other stuff. That doesn't mean nothing. Even if you do have, the Veterans Committee, well, some of those other guys probably had a good reason to get in there. And you can't judge the attitude of the baseball writer. So therefore, they get another shot with a different type of vote. But I think the list was fantastic. I really am all the way around. I mean, we could go on for days and hours debating lists, but when we're trying to break down all these players here, and there's only 2 consistencies on every list with Gehrig and Cobb, and Gehrig's on 3 of the 4, then it's a different story. But again, I think what's so good about this show is Greg and I are right around 60, right? So we're right in that area. Rick, I believe you're in your 40s, right?
Yep.
And we know that Eric is 27. But yet when you look at the fact that our ages are what they are, and you see how you're able to acknowledge, different eras, I think that's what makes it even better,
Yeah.
And now I will say that this is a complete compliment to Eric. I've never seen a 27-year-old in my lifetime who is as bright as Eric is. I swear to God. This guy is 27 years of age, and he acts like a 40 or 50-year-old because he knows the game that well. I've dealt with other people in the past that are strictly analytics that have no conception of anything. I'm not mentioning any names, but Eric doesn't give you analytics. He knows the players pretty well, and he doesn't mind letting the numbers back up what his feelings are. So, again, I don't want to criticize anybody and feel like anybody I am, but Eric is a lot more mature for his age, and that's why he's a regular on 108 Stitches Baseball Talk as well with Rick and I, and of course Lou Landers is off for the evening. So, but all in all, really dynamite list. Any other thoughts about the list, about what we may have missed? I mean, think about it. You got a 56-game hitting streak being acknowledged. Ted Williams, another guy that could easily, that I really wondered about, would have been Tony Gwynn.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Or Wade Boggs. Yep.
It's hard. I mean, Tony Gwynn, Tony Gwynn was obviously one of the best contact hitters of his generation. And obviously, Wade Boggs, he, had a great career with, having over 3,000 hits in his career. But, it's just, the reason I didn't include any guys now from the now era was I felt like not enough time's really gone by to really examine their career as a whole.
Yeah.
I mean, Miguel Cabrera, no doubt, is going to be a Hall of Famer. And that's gonna be end all to be all of it. Is he'll be in the Hall of Fame for sure. But guys now, I mean, I don't think we've taken enough time, especially the ones that recently got in. I don't think we've taken enough time to really reflect on their career before we put them in where they are. Like, obviously Derek Jeter. I mean, Derek Jeter, obviously a Hall of Famer all around. But there's just not enough time's gone by to really appreciate what he's done, just because his induction is still very fresh. It's not like now with Tris Speaker, where as the decades go on and he's still in the top 5 in all time in hits and will probably remain up there for a while. Probably it wouldn't shock me forever considering how baseball, how they play these days. But that speaks volumes that he's still in the top 5 with Ty Cobb, and just shows you just how great they were.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Miguel Cabrera, I know that a lot of people don't like to put guys that are currently playing now until they're in the Hall. But I think he's a different bird because, number one, his numbers are already at 503,000 when you judge the thing. I mean, I know we were talking earlier before we came on. Frank Robinson and Brooks Robinson are certainly guys, depending on defense and offense, could certainly make a case. And they're both in the Hall of Fame. So, I mean, again, you're only limited to 4 and 4, modern and early, but those are guys that certainly would be willing. And again, we're not getting into the pitchers. We'll leave that alone. But, again, it's a list. But what's good about having 4 individuals on is that you get a different perspective. It's like buying ice cream, right? Everybody has a different flavor of ice cream is what you have, and not everyone likes the same one. So,
And I'll put this hot take out there about Pete Rose. I can guarantee you, without Pete Rose, there would be no Big Red Machine.
I think you're right. I don't think any doubt. You want to sit here and
pretty Big Red Machine.
Huh?
And then if you want to go out there and talk about Cincinnati, I could easily make a case for Johnny Bench as well.
Oh,
Or
100%.
Joe Morgan.
Johnny Bench is probably the greatest catcher of all time.
Well, no doubt about it. I mean, Johnny Bench to me.
I could put Mike Schmidt on the list. I mean, go on and on and on. Brooks Robinson.
Pick your taste. You want power, you got that. If you want guys that can.
I wanted to go with Napoleon Lajoie, and people were looking at me like, "Who?"
No,
look at Napoleon Lajoie.
Yeah, with the Reds, you want contact, you got Rose. You want power, you got Bench and Perez. You want speed, you got Joe Morgan. They really were
balanced.
They really were balanced. That's why and they also could pitch. People forget they could pitch.
Well, I mean, Boston fans would gravitate toward Carl Yastrzemski. Detroit fans would talk about Al Kaline. Al Kaline is like
or Hank Greenberg.
Yeah, Hank Greenberg. I actually spoke to Al. I wish I could have gotten a photo with him.
And Ralph Kiner, to me, is one of the most underrated players of all time. I think he led the National League in home runs 7 or 8 years in home runs, and you never hear about him. But he was one of the best home run hitters of all time. Was Ralph Kiner.
The one guy who surprised me when I was doing the research on his all-time stats, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, was Pujols. I mean, 683 homers. What is that, like 4th or 5th on the all-time list? He's 3rd on the all-time RBI list. I mean, just think about that. All these guys we've mentioned, and I think it's just Aaron and Ruth are ahead of him. I mean, that is unbelievable. And he's got over 3,300 career hits. I mean, I had a hard time leaving him off, but it's probably sort of what Eric said. The now guys haven't had enough time to digest it. And speaking of
5 years,
10 years from now, we're talking Mike Trout.
Oh, and speaking of things, gentlemen, as we start to talk about Albert Pujols, on September 28th, we'll get to see his last game in Milwaukee.
There you go. Save that ticket.
There you go.
Save it.
I'm gonna try and get it signed.
I do want to make one note about Al Kaline when I was in spring training, and he once told me that he did wish he would have got that one home run where he would have ended up getting 3,000 hits, 400 home runs. He ended at 399. But yeah, Carl Yastrzemski did it really well out in Boston as well, and
he was the last to win the Triple Crown till Miguel Cabrera.
Yeah, right. So I mean,
and then in the National League, no one's won the Triple Crown since 1931. That was Joe Ducky Medwick. So for Cabrera to win that you're never going to see anyone win it.
Yeah, well, some of these
maybe. I don't know. I doubt it.
So I'm glad we were able to spring in some other many honorable mentions, because that way, if anybody tries to debate us, it's not like we forgot you, team. We're only limited to 4 per category. So, but meanwhile, what a nice show here. We'll talk a little nostalgia here, and I'm glad we were able to address this. So, Greg, we're looking forward to you writing the pitcher's version of this, and we'll definitely get it on as soon as possible.
Oh, there's so many.
Yeah, well, that's okay. If we had this much fun with the position players, I can only imagine what the pitcher's broadcast is going to look like. So, that said, okay, one last thing, Greg, any closing thoughts about the whole show? Give me about 30 seconds for a closing thought.
The one person I overlooked that I would give strong consideration if you're doing a Mount Rushmore, because I think that's more than just statistics, now that I give it more thought, was Rick putting Jackie Robinson out there. I mean,
okay,
if he had never played the game, how different would the game be?
Okay, fair enough. Eric? Closing thought, 30 seconds.
I really wish I would have put Stan Musial in there. Obviously, Jackie Robinson as another one, just because he changed the game, and the fact that with Musial, the guy is just he's Stan the man for a reason, and I don't think we've really appreciated his place in baseball history.
Rick?
I'd probably like to put in Rogers Hornsby. He won 2 Triple Crowns. He won 7 batting titles. He had 400 3 times. One year he had an off year. He had 375 batting average. That was an off year for him. One of the greatest hitters of all time.
Yeah, and a closing thought for me, I strongly looked at Joe DiMaggio because I look at records that will never be broken at 56 games, but I ended up going with the list, and I have no problem with doing that as well. So, meanwhile, guys, what a great show we had tonight, 108 Stitches Baseball Talk, presented by the South Florida Tribune. So with that said, Rick, why don't you let everybody know how they can get a hold of you?
You can find me on my website at www.charlottebats.com. My email address is cltbatsbaseball@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook at Charlotte MLB. We're also on there, Charlotte Bats Baseball. I'm on Twitter at Charlotte Bats Baseball. I'm on Instagram at Charlotte Bats. And you can find me on LinkedIn under Rick Curti, Curti. And go on our website and sign our petition to bring Major League Baseball to Charlotte, North Carolina.
And I should point out, Rick does a sensational job sharing the content for the South Florida Tribune, so we're eternally grateful for that. So he's a consultant / social media consultant for the South Florida Tribune. All right, Eric, go ahead.
You can find me on my Twitter at Sports Team News, or you can find me on bellyupsports.com where I cover Wisconsin Badgers football.
Very good. All right, Greg.
Yeah, you can find my articles, including the one I just did, the MLB Mount Rushmore, on southfloridatribune.com, and on Twitter, G Fuchs at Gregory Fuchs.
All right, well, I got a lot to uncover here, but we'll start with the website, www.southfloridatribune.com. Candy Ebling does a sensational job putting it all together and making sure the broadcasts go on in a timely manner. You can email us at southfloridatribune@gmail.com. Any questions, comments for all of us, you can direct them there. You want to find us on Twitter, no problem, at Tribune South gets it done. As far as the finding where the shows are, iHeartRadio, Spreaker.com, Google, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, once again, please don't hesitate to go ahead and subscribe to the South Florida Tribune. That way you get the visual as well. So, but meanwhile, like I said, Twitter, we're all over the place. Twitter, the website, YouTube, as well as the audio provider. So, meanwhile, on behalf of Rick Curti, Eric Katz, Greg Fuchs, my name is Scott Morgan, Roth Motor City Mad Mile. Thank you for joining us on this edition of 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. We will catch you the next time. Once again, my crew, you guys did a really great job for a subject that is definitely one that is a conversation piece in every sense of the word. All right, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.